Let's get reaction now on the developments in the Middle East. Joining me for this conversation is ANC International Relations Subcommittee Deputy Chairperson Obed Bapela. He joins us via the virtual platform. And in studio, I have the EFF's Godrich, Gardee. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Let me start in studio. Mr. Gardee, the reaction from your party on the latest developments. When I say the latest developments, I want to focus the attention on the United Nations Secretary General. He's now been barred from entering Israel because Israel accuses him of being biased in favor of what has been happening in Gaza and more recently Iran attacking their country. How do you see that particular action?
Thank you very much, Ekoli, and greetings to our viewers. We're really not surprised about the conduct of Israel. And it is unprecedented that the first citizen of the world will actually be banned by a rogue state, apartheid state like Israel. Typical of the South African government, the white apartheid government that actually did similar acts like the Israel government. I mean, raiding, cross-border raids to Lesotho, to Swaziland, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and the war in Angola. You can see that Israel is conducting itself not different from the Guatemalan regime of the white apartheid government.
Mr. Bapela? Let's get your reactions about Antonio Guterres being declared persona non grata in Israel.
Well, as the African National Congress, we are not shocked or surprised because Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has become a bully in that particular environment because of the support of the Americans, where they continue to flood in money and weapons. And therefore, what he's doing, even to ban the first citizen of the world, the Secretary General of the UN, is uncalled for, and it's so appalling and appalling. And we hope, therefore, that the nations that support him will also have to stand up and say, you don't do that to a international body such as the UN, not to have a voice or a say in trying to get peace and the ending of the ceasefire in that area. And they're calling for the ceasefire.
Yeah. In your view, before I come back to studio, in your view, is this potentially some indication about Israel fast becoming isolated, at least when we spoke to the FSN chief correspondent in Washington, he does appear to suggest that Israel is fast becoming isolated, even at that UN body. Well,
we know that the elections in the US, it's an issue at hand, and then the government of Joe Biden will not do anything but just to continue supporting the situation of the carnage that is going on, what we call the genocide in that area, simply because they are begging the votes of the Jewish in America. And therefore, U.S. will continue to be aiding a butcher, a bully, in really now beginning to bulldoze everybody, including in Lebanon and Iran. And we call for a ceasefire to end to the carnage, and we hope, therefore, that with the banning of the UN Secretary General, the whole world can now stand with us when we say this must come to an end. And in support South Africa's case, as we go back to the ICJ to go and say immediate ceasefire, access to the relief, but also the end of the carnage, so that negotiations for a peaceful settlement on the question of the Palestinian can resume, and finally to ensure, therefore, that region is at peace with itself.
Mr. Gardee, the ANC, through Mr. Bapela, is invoking or reminding us about the case of the South African government to the International Court of Justice in what this government, at least the sixth administration, accused the Jewish state of genocide. Is it interesting to you that the seventh administration, which is now a government of national unity, has yet to even put out a statement? What do you make of their silence in what is an escalation in tensions there?
Clearly, we will remember their silence than whatever our opponents have been saying about the issue of the people of Palestine. The ANC has got the blood of the people of Palestine in its hands. The ANC, together, all of us in parliament, took a decision that the diplomatic offices of Israel should be removed from South Africa, and the diplomats of Israel should be declared persona non grata in South Africa. But that has not happened, notwithstanding that it is a resolution of the National Assembly. It is just cosmetic, this issue of International Court of Justice. The real action is here in South Africa and not in The Hague. We must see the seriousness of the ANC by expelling the ambassador of Israel from South Africa. Just like Israel has been bold enough to tell us that the Secretary General of the United Nations is not welcomed in Tel Aviv.
The ANC is not governing on its own this time around, so it's not going to be an easy call to make. I do remember, in fact, Nomvula Mokonyane, the chair of the International Relations Subcommittee, of which Obed Bapela is part, saying in not so uncertain terms that Israel must actually be kicked out of South Africa. But the difference now is that they are not governing by themselves. It's a government of national unity. Are you not being unreasonable on the ANC?
They had all the time to do that long before the so-called government of national unity. The ANC is a beneficiary of Zionist financial support in every election. Hence today, they are in cahoots with the worst Zionist supporters, the Democratic Alliance, and that organization of Mapandinti, and all others whom you always find in Tel Aviv going to parade with Netanyahu, the person who's actually the leader of genocide against the people of Palestine. So we can't be impressed by the ANC going to The Hague, abusing the taxpayers' money. It takes a lot of millions of rands to go to The Hague. All they need to do is to send the correct message here in South Africa to say you are now declared non-persona grata in the soil of the South Africans. You cannot have blood in your hands and stay with us. For over 75 years, the people of Palestine have been yearning for their freedom. And here we are, 30 years into our democracy. You still have got a government that is having dinner and lunch with the Zionists, the people who are actually murdering the people of Palestine.
Mr. Bapela, before you respond to accusations that you sit with the Jewish people and it is part of the reason why you haven't expelled the Palestinian, rather the Israeli ambassador from South Africa, or at least you've completely shut the embassy. Let's start with why the government of the day, in the ANC's view, has yet to issue a statement about escalations in conflict in the Middle East.
Well, the government will at its own time do so. And I think this matter of the Iran reaction in warning Israel happened last night. And obviously there is information that has surfaced and diplomatic engagements that are going on. And the government will at its own appropriate time. I'm not speaking here for government for now, but they will definitely be responding, as has been the situations in the past. There's no incident that has happened in that area where the government kept mum. And so I think let's give them space to really get information, the analysis of the situation. But I just want really to say, we are not anti-Jewish. The Jewish people are human beings too. That is why the resolution for the settlement of Palestine is a two-state solution, and that includes Israel as an independent state alongside Palestine as an independent. So within the Jewish years, they are Zionists, and obviously that is the agenda and doctrine that we really ought to fight and defeat. But it does not mean when one meets the Jewish, then all of the Jewish are Zionists. And I think that should not be a correct conclusion. But at the same time, also want really to then say the issue of the closing of the Palestine, we are part of the resolution as the African National Congress in Parliament. And there are almost about 9 or 11 states in the world that have already closed the embassies. But the closing of the embassy does not end the carnage. The closing of the embassy does not end the massacre and the genocide that has now already claimed 44,000 lives. Even if we had closed it, Israel was going to behave the way it is. And what we need them to do is to go to these imperialist forces that continues to support, give money and aid to the Israel and to behave in the manner in which we are. And the International Court of Justice, but one means, because it's a court of the UN, and once that court can pronounce on Israel as a murderer and doing genocide there, and also can really call for a ceasefire, that would be a major victory that will then go to the UN Security Council, where permanent members must then begin to look at the recommendation. And South Africa is pushing that agenda that the UN Security Council must finally, I know that we still have veto powers, and then until we reform or transform that particular institution to take decision by majority, no longer by veto, then the agenda we will continue to push and will not abandon it. And no one should really undermine the role that the ICJ as an organ of the UN system that it can play and will pursue that. Yeah. But that does not mean that the implementation of the parliamentary resolution cannot be resuscitated in the 7th administration. We will also engage with our chief whip of the ANC to say what is happening and where is it, because we are part of the resolution and we are not abandoning that particular resolution.
All right, let's take a pause there for a moment and take a break. When we return, how should the government of the day digest this in the context of the government of South Africa being part of the BRICS Plus formation? We'll expand the conversation on that front in a moment. Still with me for this discussion is Obed Bapela. He is with the ANC's Subcommittee on International Relations, and Godrich Gardee is the EFF's International Relations desk. He is with that particular party leading in this regard. Mr. Gardee, the BRICS Plus formation has two countries that are effectively engaged in a war. There's Russia and there is Iran. Do you foresee a complicated relationship between South Africa and its BRICS partners in view of the fact that there is now a new government of national unity that's in power, as opposed to the ANC on its own?
Koli, I'd rather say let's watch and see who is wagging the tail of the dog. The so-called GNU is actually controlled by white capital and Zionists. I think there is a distinction between a Zionist movement and the people of the Jewish nationality. And it must be very clear that we are speaking about Zionists who are fascist and who are not different from the very same people who actually persecuted the Jews 70 years ago, the Nazists. And in this regard, we can't expect much of a contribution from the South African government in the BRICS summit that is due later this year in Russia. All we can say is that here we are. We have got a lapdog called a government of whatever in South Africa, and we can't expect much of it because it is a conglomerate of all Zionist-funded organizations. In fact, if you can go and look at them, their historical relationship with the murderous state of apartheid Israel, you can tell what's happening with this political party there in Tel Aviv. All of them actually have been on a crusade of visiting Tel Aviv all the time. And it can't be different now. And there's nothing much the South African government will ever do and impact on at the BRICS summit on the issues of international peace, because they themselves are in cahoots with those countries that are actually in aggression against the people of Palestine.
Mr. Bapela, has the South African government's influence in the BRICS formation been tampered with, you think, given that this is now a government of national unity as opposed to the ANC-led government? Is this relationship complicated now, you think?
Well, let me just quickly comment on Gardee to finally agree with me that not all Jewish are Zionist. And we are agreeing, as I said earlier, we need to distinguish the Zionists and their doctrine, which is what is at core as to why the Palestinians are not yet free. And on that one, at least we have found each other on that score. However, on the GNU, on the statement of intent, international relations has never been contested as an agenda that will be chaired, advocated, and led by the president that comes from the African National Congress. And if you go into the statement of intent, there's nowhere where anyone had not signed and then said why international relations is not a contested element. No one contested it. So the policy and the foreign policy of South Africa remains the same. The championing of that policy will then be led by the president, and nothing has changed in terms of our stance on the resolution of Palestine. Nothing has changed in terms of our progressive agenda. Yes, as a government, you relate to all, but then you know that in that relationship, there will be a core element that is on the left and that is progressive and well consolidated in relations with them. That then, in the BRICS, obviously, the matter, I'm not sure if it's on the agenda, but it's a worrying element that the Middle East is now quoting a kind of a breaking point that can go into war. We need really to ensure that that region does not go into war, but the behavior of Israel is what is at core. And then obviously those who support Israel with finance and arms and ammunition must then be called to order. But the BRICS might then engage on the issue so that we do not end up with another war that is simmering. As you said, Ukraine, NATO is not even Ukraine and Russia. NATO is waging a war in Ukraine against Russia. So we cannot have another conflict as the world emerging in that particular region. But Israel has been provoking the environment, and we hope therefore that those who support Israel, as they said, they want a diplomatic solution. Let that diplomatic solution come, and so that avert the conflict to further claim more lives across Palestine, whilst we are calling for this cessation of hostilities in Palestine. Let it not extend to Lebanon, let it not extend to Iran, because it will be a catastrophe if it happens that way.
Before I come back to studio, Mr. Bapela, can I just ask this question? In view of what you have just said, what should, in the ANC's view, what should be the South African government's appeal to Iran, given these escalating tensions? And in the same breath, how weighty is South Africa's voice, you think, right now?
Well, Iran is a member of BRICS. We will be engaging with it as a member bilaterally, but also will engage with other countries in the region around this provocation that is coming from Israel on the mitigation elements so that we avoid another war. And I think the Freedom Charter of the ANC, which was adopted in 1955, says all world conflicts must be resolved by negotiations and settlements that are able then to bring that particular peace. But those who are provocative, then we need them to say who are the supporters and isolate those supporters and engage them. Maybe BRICS might even take a resolution that might then say, let's go to those who support and say, for that conflict to end, we should not allow this one to be as provocative as is the case, so that we could then begin to bring peace in the region of Middle East. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to see another war breaking in that area.
Mr. Gardee, in that same vein, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would have thought the EFF does indeed also subscribe to the Freedom Charter. It does support the Freedom Charter. And so
Correct.
if you are a great supporter of that important document produced in 1955, how then do you speak in terms that seem to want to escalate this situation? Because you said today that Iran is quite correct in responding. This is a direct response to the aggression of Israel. If you do subscribe to the Freedom Charter, you've heard Mr. Bapela saying, it's clear that any conflict, any world wars must be ended through dialogue. Isn't that what you should be advocating for?
Not at all, Goli. You will recall that the First World War was started and caused by an assassination of a political leader in Australia also, Austria. And when you look at the history of the Second World War, it was started as a result of other countries invading another country, as did Germany, as did Japan, Italy. So today, we see the repeat of the two world wars. We see the assassination of leaders. We see the invasion of other countries by Israel. Israel is dragging the world to a third world war. Mark my word, I tell you now, Xoli, Israel is dragging the world into a third world war. Nowhere has it ever happened that one country can stand up to so many countries and think that it will get away with it and no other countries will enter into the fray. And
Russia has invaded Ukraine. Why aren't you talking about that?
The issue of Russia and Ukraine, you will know better than I do, and you have asked us and many other people about the issue of the NATO intervention and expansionist policy in the Eastern Europe. And for as long as NATO and the West are actually obsessed with the expansion of their influence and another neo-colonialism and imperialist policy that we have seen in the First and the Second World War. So it will happen, and Russia, like any other country, will stand its ground. It cannot, its security be threatened by the NATO countries. So the people of Palestine, you will recall, Xoli, we don't have to lecture you in the history of our struggle in South Africa. All these countries that today are actually in support of Israel, they never condemned the Botamalan regime when it was invading Lesotho, when it was invading Zambia, killing children of South Africa in a crèche. In a crèche. They bombed the crèche. They bombed the houses of our liberation fighters in exile. They went and invaded Angola, thanks to the Cubans who threw them back. They went everywhere. In Mozambique, they went and just finished all our people in Matol. It is exactly what the Israel government is doing, going to Iran to assassinate leaders of their opponents, going to Lebanon, going to Syria, and going everywhere ever there are dissidents and people who see in a different view to what the Israel government believes in. And for that, of crossing borders and assassinating your opponents, you can rest assured that we will never support that, because we are a victim as people of South Africa to a similar conduct by the apartheid government, who was actually supported in its military architecture by the Israel government.
In the EFF's view, what will end this conflict in the Middle East?
The countries that are supporting Israel supposed to rain on Israel and say to Israel, enough, it's enough. It's 76 years today. This conflict has been going on. Can we stop it? We cannot support you any longer to murder the people of Palestine. We cannot support you any longer to interfere with the political affairs of your neighboring countries. We cannot support you any longer with military hardware to invade and destabilize other countries. Right. Only when the West can come to that realization, so the conflict in Palestine will end, because that will mean the freedom of the people of Palestine.
Mr. Bapela, final thoughts from your side. You have the United States as a trading partner with South Africa. You have bilateral relations as a country. We have bilateral relations with the US. What should be the message to them? What influence can you bring to bear on the US?
Well, we have trade relations with many countries. And I think all countries in the world do have such. Even though we differ with them ideologically, we also differ in terms of them trying to choose who our friends should be. And Nelson Mandela did say that we remain trade and partners, however, you can't choose friends for us. And you remember the relationship between US and us trying to bring those laws of malign is because they wanted to dictate. But we remain standing as a country that says where there are human rights violations, we'll stand up. Where there are killings, because there's no resolution implementation on the solution that has already been advocated and agreed to in the United Nations, we will then push for the implementation of that resolution on Palestine becoming independent and free. But also, Israel, as I said, is a bully, is an aggressor, and I agree with Gardee on that one. Until that support of finance and military weapons is stopped, and those who support bring a diplomatic solution, a long-standing solution that will resolve the Palestinian question, we will not wait to support those that are oppressed. We are not moving and shying from that, but obviously this cannot end in war. This cannot be ended by weapons. It can only take the stand of leadership in Israel, who will then say, we want to find a solution so that Palestine can exist as a state alongside Israel. And that is a solution that everybody supports. It's just this aggression by this Prime Minister of Israel, who is refusing to listen, but he does so because he knows there's a big brother somewhere that supports him, and that is why he's becoming a bully in that area. But let's engage and avoid another conflict that will lead to the Third World War.
Thank you very much for your time and those thoughts. Obed Bapela is with the ANC and Godrich Gardee in studio. Thank you very much. He is with the EFF. All right.